Very good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to TechGig webinar series, our endeavor to empower techies. We believe that sharing of knowledge is the key of enhancing our performances and for our growth as professionals. With this principle in mind, TechGig has initiated a series of webinars conducted by industry experts to give a crisp insight of various domains. Today's session is 7th in the webinar series on mobile app development, giving insights into project management and quality assurance for mobile apps. Our guest speaker today is Ms. Arunima Shekhar, Project Manager at Spice Labs. Arunima is responsible for managing project deliveries, timelines, and ensuring quality adherence for mobile apps at Spice Labs. Prior to Spice Labs, Arunima worked with IBM as a consultant on telecom billing and customer management services, and with Amdocs as an expert in telecom billing and revenue management. Arunima holds a master's degree in computer applications from SNDT Women's University and a bachelor's degree in electronics from Delhi University. Gentlemen, this presentation will continue for the next 1 hour and we'll take your questions after the presentation. In the meanwhile, you can post your queries on techgeek.com or through the chat pane available in webinar software. Without further ado, I introduce you to our guest speaker, Ms. Arunima.
Thank you, Bharat. Good afternoon to everybody, and thank you, TechGeek, for giving me this opportunity to speak to all of you guys. Bharat has done a good job of introducing me already, so we'll straight away get to the presentation. We'll be talking about project management and quality assurance in the mobile applications industry today. A brief introduction on who am I, apart from what Bharat told you. I'm somebody who got into project management accidentally and then realized that this is my calling. I've been working with mobile applications for the past 7 months, prior to which I was working mainly on enterprise applications. And why I got into mobile applications was because I'm a gaming addict. Now, who is this presentation for? It's more than the project manager sitting out there. It's more for the application developers, which include independent mobile app developers, standalone guys, organizations which are creating mobile apps, and organizations who want to enter into the mobile application development. Now, the type of applications that we target here are standalone applications like games, utilities, entertainment, use it one time and get over, and services like Make My Trip, Naukri, etc. This is a short agenda on what we'll be doing today. We'll be doing a bit of theory. We'll be spending about 20% of our time doing theory today about what is project management and the various approaches to project management, wherein we'll be seeing majorly two approaches, the traditional and the adaptive, and some practical stuff which is going to be more interesting, finding out answers to how to do things and why we're doing things. We spend most of our time doing that. Within this, we'll be covering how to pick the most effective project management model, the best practices that we should follow, and the QA activities. The disclaimer, we will not be, this presentation is not going to be talking of any one standard methodology. It's more based out of what our experience is and what has worked for us at labs. So it's not one person's, not a single person's view. It's just what is more, has been more practical for us. So without delaying further, let's get into the presentation, the actual things. We'll start with a brief introduction about what project management is about. Project management is defined as the discipline of planning, organizing, securing, and managing resources, and working under the constraints of cost, time, and scope. And why we do project management is to achieve specific goals. Now, so we can say that project is an endeavor with a defined start and a defined finish, wherein the finish is generally something that becomes undefined, and it's constrained by three things. One is the time, the second is the budget, and the third is the scope. The time, budget, and scope is what is termed something as the project management triangle, which is what is this slide about. Scope, time, and cost are the three constraints under which any project is bound. Any project model has to be built keeping in mind these three constraints and how you would schedule and reschedule your resources, your deliverables around it, eventually to deliver a product of some quality. So quality becomes the center of this triangle, and the constraints are the scope of the project, what all you want to deliver in that project, the time frame in which you would want to deliver the whole thing, and the budget or the cost. So the resources, the infrastructure, everything would come under cost. So like I said, the project becomes an endeavor with a defined with a defined start and finish, wherein you have some inputs going into it and the outputs are your deliverables. The inputs are your goal, what you're targeting to achieve in the end, the team staff or the resources, the money that you put in, the time, and the equipment. So you put all of this into the blender called the project, and you get the output, which are your deliverables. Now that was about project management. Now there are different techniques of project management, or different approaches we can say to project management. Traditionally, a phase-driven approach was followed, which we all know waterfall model to be one of the pioneer or the flagships of the phase-driven approach. A waterfall model is a very strict model wherein each phase is started only after the previous phase finishes. So you have initiate, the project initiation, then the planning and the designing, then the actual execution of the project, monitor and control, and the completion and final delivery of the project. Now this is a very strict model wherein strict and a very constrained model wherein you cannot start the next stage till you have reached a certain degree of completion in the previous stage. The other kind of approach is an adaptive approach, which is one of the words that we always keep hearing about the adaptive approach nowadays is the agile technology. So this is more like every day. This is more agile as the word defines it, wherein things are allowed to change. You do not plan for a very long time. You just do in short sprints. You plan every iteration and it goes into a daily build. So the product, you do short sprints of it and then work towards the final build. Now both of these approaches have their own good and bad points. The waterfall model, the disadvantage or the limiting factor there is it's a very strict model. It does not allow for too much of flexibility. On the other hand, agile becomes a very flexible model wherein you have risks such as scope creep, wherein if you have your your customer who can go on changing your requirements at every iteration, so you tend to work towards scope creep wherein your scope might keep on changing. The other problem that is present in agile, which is specifically applicable for mobile application development, is that new resources need to they lack the effort estimation and decision-making skills that are required in Agile to stand up and say that, yes, this is how much time I'm going to require to do it. Or, okay, to take a decision where as soon as he's faced with a problem. So since and a lot of people working in the mobile applications industry are going to be mostly freshers or new to this field. So they will need to be clubbed with somebody who's more experienced. And since we work in a very resource-constrained environment, this becomes a little bit of a problem for us. So following a fully agile model also is not very feasible. So what become our challenges? Which is the model of project management do we pick? And what are the best practices that we want to apply? These are the two major challenges we are facing. Now, our answers would primarily depend on what are our available resources and what is the type of products. Now we'll take these question by question. First we'll address the question of which model of project management we want to pick. So before we try to start answering our questions, we need to understand the kind of environment we work in. The environment we work in are driven by our work definitions, which is like multiple platforms, multiple products, multiple releases, changing product definitions. And it's a very constrained environment because we have very few resources. Most of the times we have very few resources who are expected to multitask, give out multiple releases at the same time, and they're very aggressive timelines. If you've got a bug fix coming in, if you've got a product on the App Store and you see your users start giving a review about it, you need to fix that bug immediately. You cannot really say, I want to change request, I want to update my product design, etc., and then I'm going to start doing my bug fix. It's going to be like 1 hour, 2 hours, things like that. And the third constraint that a lot of independent developers, independent app developers and small companies are going to face is a limited budget. Now, what exactly is the driving factor behind this kind of environment? The environment that mobile applications industry provides us is because it's a very dynamic and an ever-changing market. Every day you have new devices, every day you've got newer applications. You log on to the App Store in the morning, in a day you've got like 100 more applications added to the App Store. And I'm just talking of one App Store. So it's a very dynamic market. And why this happens is because there's a large number of application publishers. And apart from the publishers, there are an even larger number of subscribers or end users. So your consumer base is huge. So how this is driving the environment is because your consumer base is huge and it's growing. So the publishers are doing more and more to every day to cater to that consumer market demands. So it's a cycle, and that's what makes this a very dynamic market and a very volatile market and a very exciting place to work in. So coming back to our question on which model should we use in such a place is something called iterative development. Now, this is nothing new. This is something all of us are familiar with. This is like a kind of a marriage between a traditional waterfall model and the agile model, wherein you have a product design that goes in as an input. Then then there are a number of iterations which are going to be repeated as required, wherein you plan, you develop, you test, and you give a feedback. So the product design, this is basically what is iterative development all about. Once you're satisfied with the level of product you've got, then you release the product. So what we are going to see in our next slides is how we apply the iterative development model and how we rather customize it to suit our needs. So let's start with the design phase. Basically, in any product design phase, our variables are our product and we need to know the knowledge about the product and its end users. If we are making an application, we need to know what we intend to do with that application, who we are targeting it at. Are we targeting it at kids? Are we targeting it at 60 plus people? Are we targeting it at just women? So these are our variables. We need to know what our product wants to do and who's going to use it. We need to have a skeleton of the requirements ready. So it's not like it's out of the air, it's in my mind and I want to implement it. I should have some kind of a template design ready, which is like a skeleton that this is what my product is going to look like, and this is what I want my product to do. This is where my application is going to go, and this is the kind of users I want my product to be downloaded by. And I need to identify my use cases, which are my important use cases. This is specifically important in the case of service-based applications like travel applications or like Naukri, Make My Trip, India Times. This is important. Identifying the use cases is becomes more important in these kind of applications than in mobile applications like maybe games or entertainment apps or themes. There the use cases are not so important. There what becomes important is the end user. Here the use cases. But yes, my variables therefore become my end user or demographics, the requirements, and the use cases. And what are, as the end product of the product design phase, I need the first version of the product design, which is what I said is the skeleton. Now, a common mistake that most people tend to do is start the scheduling before you have a design in hand. That's not what we should be doing. We have the product design created, we have a skeleton of the requirements from our product, and then we start scheduling. Now, once the design is ready, like I said, we start the scheduling. The first thing we need to do is create the work breakdown structure, or what we popularly known as the WBS, for all the tasks. And here I mean all tasks, every small and big task. Do not exclude anything, even if it means resourcing some hardware or something like that. We do not ignore those. Put everything into your WBS. Organize all the tasks that we have made into phases. For example, graphics and UI is one phase, creation of graphics and UI. The next phase is development, then we have a phase for unit testing, then we have a phase for testing and QA. Once we have done organizing them into phases, after that we start identifying the critical tasks in each phase. Now, one popular mistake that most people try to do is, and what is also addressed by Agile methodology, is that we try to ignore the smaller tasks and just focus on the critical tasks. Now, doing this kind of a thing, that's not wrong, but doing this kind of a thing allows you to focus on the critical tasks because you've identified the critical tasks in each phase and you set up your milestones around them. But at the same time, in the background, you still have your smaller tasks which are equally important, but which should not become the focus. So you know everything you need to do, and then you can sit and concentrate on each of the tasks, each of the critical tasks. And yes, these phases can overlap. It's not like once graphics are done, only then I can start development. Once development is done, only then I can start testing and put it into QA. I can overlap these. For example, I have some set of graphics ready for one screen size. I can put it into development, and I keep doing the graphics for the remaining screen sizes. Same thing for development. I can just do one screen size, put it into testing, and then I keep working on the other screen sizes. Meanwhile, my testing team can keep testing the flow for one screen size, because after that it's more of a resource manipulation. So these phases can overlap, and we can optimize on a lot of time using overlap of phases. Continuing with scheduling, once we've done the work breakdown structure, identified our critical tasks, what we do is then we gather our team around for a assessment on the WBS. It's not like if you created a work breakdown structure, it's going to be the absolute defining thing for your product, for your project. You never do things by yourself. Gather your team around you, assign a rough time frame to each of the tasks in consultation with them and the responsible resources. More than telling them, it should be getting it from them, how they're going to do things. So we do not attempt to schedule all by ourselves. We need to involve the whole team and then create the schedule. And then set up the task milestones and checkpoints. And one important thing that we must do is keep sufficient buffer, because there are always surprise activities that are going to keep coming in. So keep sufficient buffer for every task. Here, this is a sample WBS for the design phase in any mobile applications project plan, wherein you would need to create a detailed design, create the screen prototypes, create the graphics around it, create the content, and create the technical design. Now, if you look at this WBS very carefully, one important thing that is present after every creation is a review. And review is one thing that most of us miss out, because while doing mobile applications, we're always so crunched for time that we just tend to say, it's okay, I'll do the reviews later, and that later never comes. So it's very important to concentrate on the review. In fact, I would say that review is probably more important than actually creating any of these components, because a lot more comes out in reviews. So make sure you do a review of every step after every step. So summing up our scheduling phase, our variables in this phase were the WBS, all the tasks that are present in each of the phases, and the timelines as defined by the product team. If let's say your product team wants some release to be put out at a certain event, let's say Diwali was just here and you want to do something around Diwali, so that's a timeline which is given by the product. It's not something you give it to them. So for every application, every product, every release, the product team is also going to define some kind of a timeline. So your variables therefore become the tasks and the timelines. And of course, the constraints in the scheduling phase still remain your costs and your resources. At the end of the scheduling phase, you should have the first version of the project plan ready. Why I say a first version is because your project plan is bound to change once you actually get into the development mode. So this is the first version, which we should keep it flexible to be updated in the next phase. Once we have the scheduling done, we start with the actual execution. So the input to the execution phase becomes your project plan, which goes to the development team. The development team works on it, works on the product. Then it goes into a peer review. The peer review by the product team. Peer review in normal Java practices or normal coding practices is a code review by your peers. Here, by peer review, I mean the product peer review, wherein if you're doing an application, you run the application on your handset and see if it is working. The product team peer review is very important because they are bound to give you some changes after that. Unless you're doing a services-based app where you're actually just scaling down from the internet onto your handheld device, you are bound to get changes in the product that you show it to them after the first iteration of development. So once peer review by product is done, you revisit the product design, see if you want to make any changes into it, if there were any peer review comments by the product team. Then if those comments are something that are going to actually require more development effort and more time, then you might even need to rework the plan a little. And this iteration would go on till the product team is satisfied with the product they have in hand. Now, in the beginning of starting to explain all of this, I said that we need to have the design as an input into the iterations. Now, theoretically, iteration-based model does not stringently say that we need to have a design ready. This is something that we generally do. The reason being, it kinds of puts an upper limit on the number of iterations needed. Because if you have like 80% of your design thought out in your mind, then it's seen in practice that you won't be getting back too many comments for change from the product team. But if you try to iterate a lot on design itself, then you will just be stuck in this iteration cycle for God knows how long. So it always helps to have some kind of a design ready before you enter into this loop of iterations of development. Once the product is satisfied with once the product team is satisfied with the product they have in hand, it goes into testing and QA. So our variables in the execution step are the product app review comments, and the end product would be the final binaries, which have been put through peer review as well as code review. So the final binaries are sent to the testing team, and we enter into the testing and QA phase of our development cycle, product development cycle. Now, testing in QA is something that in the mobile applications industry, it has not been exploited too much till now. It's a common mistake to actually ignore or not give enough importance to the testing. So it gets really less attention than what it should. So that is a reason that if you see like 10,000 or 100,000 apps on the App Store today, when you download them, you will find just 2 or 3 of them which you want to actually play or use. So now, why is it that this happens? Why is it that testing actually gets less attention than what it should? There are actually 7 constraints to it, out of which 3 is what we consider as very important. One is the time constraint. Because of a huge amount of release pressure, there's more focus on engineering and the UI design part of it than actually testing out the end product. Once you're done, once you have the binary in hand, most of the times you just do a kind of sanity. Okay, I download it, run it on all the number of devices I've got, and put it out. If it's running fine, it's not crashing, fine, I put it out. I'm not actually going to go through all the flows in my application, go back and forth between screens, try all pop-ups, try all interfaces and services that it might link to before actually putting it out. So this is one major reason why testing is often ignored. The second is the lack of standard guidelines and automated tools for mobile app testing. There are no set guidelines for the kind of testing practices that should be followed for mobile application testing. We have a couple of automated tools that have come in now, but either because of the cost or whatever, they're not still used so extensively. And the third most important reason is the availability of devices. Now, a lot of app publishers are actually standalone entities, or a small team of 5 getting together. So getting access to the large range of devices that are available in the market, whether you want to develop for iOS, or whether you want to do it for Android, or you want to do it for Symbian, the number of devices is huge. So it's not really possible to get every device and test it out on it. You might use simulators and stuff, but then again, that involves putting in a lot of money into developing the simulators or getting the simulators from there. So those contacts. So for standalone independent developers, this becomes a very big constraint, testing. So that's one reason that effective testing, even if they want to do it, they are not able to do it. So, and one more thing that we feel is a constraining factor is that we try to apply the traditional test plans to mobile applications, which is not the right thing to do, because you do not want to concentrate on every screen, every element in every screen. You want to test it, but at times this kind of testing runs the risk of actually missing out to test the functionality. Like, if you're playing a word game, for example, you need to check if after playing 50 times, 50 words, is my app still behaving the way it should? Or, if I'm playing, say, 200 words, am I still getting the same kind of scores? Am I still getting the same achievements? Am I still going to the same services? Am I still going onto Facebook or whatever? It's something that we're not able to do, because if I follow my traditional test plans, they're going to tell me test this screen, then go to this screen, check the flow. It's not going to tell me test it 100 times or test it 200 times. So if we try to apply the traditional practices, then also we have a problem. And if we try to do just a sanity kind of testing, that's also a problem. So we need to find a middle way somewhere. And since there's no standard guidelines for mobile app testing, this is something that you need to put thought into. And since we are constrained by time, we just don't do it. So it's kind of a cycle, and eventually it's the quality of the app that suffers at the hands of it. So how we handle QA will be decided by the type of applications we are doing. Are we doing service-based apps? Are we doing utility apps? I might be doing just a bedside clock for my iPad. So it's a simple app which does not require too much of UI effort. So is it like that, or is it utilities, or is it some kind of gaming application which is heavy graphics and a lot of sounds and effects? And the scale of the applications. How many platforms am I going to? How many users can I handle at the same time? So how we are going to handle QA, how we want to test out our products, is decided by these two factors. And of course, there's no best way. Like I said, there's no defined practices. So we have the liberty to choose the model that works best for us. So that's a very big advantage, actually. Now, there are some testing tools that are available in the market. One of them is the ZPX. It's a manual testing tool, and it can be used with the HP A&M's Quick Test Professional QTP. And this is the link to where you can get it from. The other is TestQuest, which is an automated testing tool, and that's the link for it. Then there are some tools for bug tracking, or rather, actually, these are not essentially mobile application based, but these can be customized pretty well to do the bug tracking and support functions for mobile applications, Bugzilla and Mantis. This slide is just an FYI, guys. So like I said, testing and QA is something that's often ignored. And what we tend to forget is the unit testing, then the performance testing. Like I said, if your app is using some service in the background, then you really need to overload that service, whichever server it's connecting to. So we need to do a performance testing. If I'm using BBM, for example, I need to check if I'm interfacing two handsets over BBM, if I'm going to do a third one, if I'm going to do a fourth one, sending the same sending a request to the same device, what happens? If I'm sending 10 BBM requests to the same application on the same device, what happens? So that is a kind of testing we just tend to ignore, or due to lack of time or budgets, whatever. The third thing, and a very important thing that a lot of us, especially when we are working in small units, tend to ignore is the support functions. And this is very important because support is actually the health check for your app. More than what your app store tells you, it's going to be your support mails, your user feedbacks, which are going to tell you where you stand. So it's a very good measure of your popularity. Users don't really understand what those stars they give you on the app store actually means. I mean, I have seen apps which have got where the user writes, "I love this app," and then they give it 1 star. So support mails are an actual feedback, an actual measure of how popular your app is, and it's the best way to relate to your user. If you're able to send back the response, if your user is facing some function, some problem and some issue, and he sends a support mail to you, and you respond to him in time, then you have a winner. You get that user. So if you're really looking to build your active user base and build it strong, then support is one function you really should not ignore, because it's the best way to relate to your user. So eventually we come to the last phase of our life cycle, that's the delivery and support. Once you've put out your app onto the App Store, then you need to provide continued application support, both in terms of enhancements. You could get an idea from the user reviews, from your feedback mails, from your competition and peers around you, the app stores, the events, anything. And enhancements obviously can also be futuristic. If I know there's a technology coming up, if I know there's an NFC and I know nobody else has done it, I would like to do it. So enhancements could also be futuristic, wherein you think, you vision, and create something. And of course, providing bug fixes, which is very important, because if you have a bug fix out there in your application, you'll be surprised by seeing the way your user base is going to drop. Now we come to the next part of our presentation, which was talking about the best practices. We're going to keep this a little simple and not get into too many details about every best practice that should be followed. This is more of a customization of available best practices to what suits our needs, to what suits the needs of any mobile application developer. So we categorize them into 3 phases: the design, into the best practices for the design phase, for the development, and for testing. Now, best practices in design are, there are 2 kinds of standards available. One is the product design standard, and the other is the UI design best practices. Now, there are best practices, mostly industry standard practices are that you should support all orientation. You want to flip it vertical, flip it into portrait, flip it into landscape. You should maintain visual stability. Don't switch screens too many times. If you can change something on the same screen somewhere and just keep the rest of the screen same, you should try to do that, so that your user does not have to move between too many screens. Enable collaboration. Put in Facebook, put in BBM, any kind of other chat tools you can use, put in NFC. So you enable, put in leaderboards. These are things that will spread around your app. It's a way of getting more users, getting more downloads. Minimize the number of settings that a user needs to do, because this is an irritant for the user, and this is out of our own experience as well, we've seen that if you tell the user to do too many things with the app, he gets irritated. If I want to launch a website, or if I want to just simply play a game, and you tell me to do 10 settings, I'll just get irritated and close the app or probably delete it. So minimize the number of settings that the user has to do. And you can actually find the complete list at this link that I have provided. These are nothing but actually Apple design, these are design standards that are set down by Apple for its iOS applications. So these are the industry standard practices, and our practice that we follow at Spice Labs is very simple. We just try to make the user comfortable with your app. He should want to come back to it tomorrow and day after and the day after it. Best practices in development would be of two sorts. One is the Java or whatever language you're using, the coding best practices for that, whether it's Symbian you're using. The one more thing that you should follow, which I pointed out earlier as well, is the reviews, which are as important in the development phase as in the design phase. The code reviews and the peer reviews. So if you're writing a piece of code, get it reviewed by your peers. And the other guidelines are those which are given by the individual app stores. If you're developing for Android or whether you're developing for iOS, each of these give you their own guidelines for development. So we need to try and put in those best practices into our applications while the development phase is going on. The third is the best practices for testing in QA. Now, again, here we don't have any industry standards, but yes, there are some things which would do you good if you followed it. One is the unit testing. Before anything is put out into final QA, do a unit by unit, screen by screen testing of every screen, the UI components, if they're rightly aligned, if every menu function, every button on the screen is working properly, or whatever unit you want to break down your application into, depending on your product. For performance testing, like I said, the load testing, the endpoints, check the endpoints, and check the services that run in the background. The product acceptance testing, which is, after the final testing is done, you need to get a final product sign-off that yes, they are comfortable with this release and they know what is going out in this release and it is as per what they wanted. This might seem a very trivial thing to do, but actually it's very important, because most of the times when you put out an application, you will just try to keep enhancing it. You won't be doing like 20 applications a month. You'll try, the best practice is generally to try to do one application and keep giving it enhancements so that you can sustain it. So if you want to really sustain an application of yours on a particular app store for say 1 to 2 to even up to 2 years or more, then what you need to do is keep providing timely updates. And these updates and releases or enhancements need to be planned out in a particular manner which the product team would have done. So this is the reason that the final product, before it's uploaded onto the App Store, needs to be given a final stamp of approval from the product team. And of course, we need to do the device sanity. Check that it's running on every device. If you don't have the device, use the simulators. Check that it's working for all the screen sizes the way you wanted it to. So we eventually see these are some points that we want to think about before doing any kind of applications. Is be very clear on what you want to do, what kind of app stores, what are the types of apps, where you want to scale. Do you want to scale on the app stores? Today I'm doing maybe Android. Tomorrow I want to do the BlackBerry App Store. And then I want to do the iPhone. Do I want to scale on releases? Or, so which means that like I said, we have one application and we just keep giving them updates, giving the user more updates and keep scaling our app. Or do you want to do more apps? So my plan is like, I'm doing 5 apps today, I'm going to do 10 apps next month, another 15, my number of apps increases to 15 the month after that. Do you want to scale on the number of apps, or do you want to scale on the app store or on the releases? So what you want to do, where you want to scale. And finally, something that's important but which we generally do not consider is what is the extra baggage that you're carrying. What is it that you will discard if you are really hard crunched for resources and time? So mostly these are going to be the no profit apps. They're not really doing much for you. They're not giving you downloads. They're not giving you user base. They're not giving you any kind of money. So you should have a clear list of the extra baggage you've got. The outdated apps, something that was cool one year back might not be cool today. So you would want to drop it instead of trying to go on supporting it. So we should have a very clear list of the extra baggage that we're carrying and which we're going to shed if we want to. So these are some things that we should constantly be thinking about to evolve. It's not like I have to sit and think this today before my product starts, before my project starts, or I don't have to think about it as a lessons learned after my project is over. It is something that I have to continuously think, and these are lists that I have to keep continuously evolving. A few tips. Effective planning does not mean that you should create a roadmap for the next 1 year. You won't be able to. It's as simple as that. Leave alone next 1 year, you won't be able to do next 6 months also. But what you can do is try to predict the trends which are going to be there 3 months later. Study the upcoming technologies. Like I said, BBM came in-app came in, NFC came in. So you keep yourself updated with what are the things that are, what are the new offerings by every app store. Keep studying the technologies that are coming up every day and keep thinking about how you can use that in your apps. Create a roadmap of releases. And what is important and what is also a common mistake is do not create a roadmap for a time frame. Create a roadmap for the releases, because it's that which is going to help you. If you plan for 4 months, you don't know what would have happened in the next 4 months. Create a plan for releases. Chart out that today I have this app. Tomorrow I'm going to put in these enhancements, the next set of enhancements, and so on. And then map it to the time. Do not work it the other way around, that I need to create a roadmap for 4 months. I want to put out 1 release every month, and now I have to think what the releases are. I should be always ready with ideas for 4 releases, depending on my environment. Like I said, what are all the technologies coming up, what all I want to do, and then chart them to the time. Be prepared for the surprises. This is one very important thing to do, and we commonly miss it out, is we should always be prepared for surprises. There could be application bugs, there could be service disruptions. We always need to plan and schedule our activities in such a manner that we have enough buffer for these kind of things happening. The other releases should not get suffered at the hands of these surprises. And lastly, and very importantly, we should learn to read the pulse of your user, because this is very important. You should try to understand what your user wants and understand what he wants tomorrow. Don't try to understand what he's wanting today. Don't cater to what he's wanting today. If he sends you a mail that I want this feature, your mistake was you should have thought of that feature a month back. So try to understand what he will want tomorrow. And that you can do when you've actually understood your user. So connect with your user. Now quickly summarizing what we did. We just went through the project management and popular techniques in it. and we saw how which approach suits best. Of course, these are not definitive. We can always pick up and customize whatever we want. And the keyword is here, customize. We should not, don't go by the rules. If you're talking of project management technique, build your model around what you do. Don't build what you do around a pre-existing model. Because Agile wants it, or because Waterfall wants it, or because a third methodology wants it, don't plan that way. You plan your own way and just pick up the lessons from these technologies. And again, best practices is not a Bible. The industry standard practices are good. Learn from them. Don't learn them. So you don't have to copy paste them. You really have to understand, take the learnings from those best practices and use whatever suits you. So I am sure everybody is going to recognize this person. And like a lot of you guys, he's my favorite too. So people think focus means saying yes to the thing you've got to focus on, but that's not what it means. It means saying no to the 100 other good ideas that are there. You really have to pick them carefully. These are the references. And if you have any doubts, you can always get back to me at the email ID given here. Now we'll take up the questions. Okay. Okay, so we have the questions coming in here. Right. We have this question by Prasad which says project management techniques are the same for any project application. What are the special techniques which is specifically applicable for mobile apps? Like I said, agreed, these techniques are obviously the same. And special techniques, like I said in the end, is that you have to customize them, which is specifically applicable for mobile apps is the iterations, which are important because you really don't know, it's totally unavoidable to have any kind of changes to the end app, right? So if you're starting with a design, it's not like an enterprise app where I say that this is my design and this is a strict design. I cannot make any changes to it. This is a very dynamic environment. I take 2 weeks to develop an app from start to finish, but within those 2 weeks there would be maybe 10 more people who've done the same thing. So I want to evolve it. So the iterations is something which is very important here. And the other thing that is very important here is the QA, which, as I said, is something which is highly ignored. So these are two very specifically applicable things for mobile apps. The other question we have is by Satish, which says, what are the tools using mobile application testing? I assume you're asking me the tools for mobile application testing. There's a slide which I had mentioned, the popular tools that I use currently. There's a question by Mohan, which says, what do you mean by device sanity? Okay, device sanity, I meant checking your application on every device you want to put it out on. So if I'm doing it for BlackBerry and I'm doing it for, let's say, 3 screen sizes and about 15 devices on those, I should run it. I should run my application at least once on each of those devices or their simulators. So that's what I meant by device sanity. I hope I answered your question. We have Nagesh is saying, can you please show the reference slide once again? Uh, sure, we can probably go back to the. Well, you can download actually the entire webinar, so you'll get the references in it as well. Okay, taking up the next question by Manish. When we talk about project management best practices, PMI and Prince come into mind. Have you used these in your projects for mobile apps? How do you customize the processes for mobile apps? Okay, like I mentioned at the beginning of my presentation, I'm a project manager by accident. I'm not certified or anything, but yes, we have gone through the principles of both the project management practices you're talking of, and we have not used them directly, but we have used the learnings from them. We have customized some things from PMI and some things from Prince, and it's more of the principles that we have used. We have not used the practice copy pasted into our applications. Okay, what are the various QA metrics that one should track? This is by Pankaj. By QA metrics, I presume you mean the logging and stuff. See, mainly there are some things. When you do a QA, there are some things that you should keep in mind. You should always have a logging structure, infrastructure put into your app. Okay, so that is one metric that is very important in mobile apps. And the other is the test plans, which as it is will give you the metrics that you want to track. Is ZPX a manual testing tool? Yes, Srija. Okay, there's a very interesting question from Prasad again. When it comes to QA and mobile apps, designing UI is very difficult as it has got to suit various devices, models, and various OSs. So how can we implement QA in this scenario to handle UI issues? This is a very practical question and we actually face this problem. So see, UI, you have to actually think and design one template, okay, and you port it to the other screen sizes. And when you do a QA, you need to do it screen size wise. So because the UI that you have created for one screen size is going to look the same on all devices of that screen size, more or less. What might differ in each device of the same screen size is going to be the quality of the picture. So we generally put an ignore on that unless it's into iPhone or iPad, where we know, unless it's a device which we know has got a lot of downloads and a lot of active users, we generally put an ignore on it. But when we want to implement QA, we do it screen size wise, check the UI for every screen size in both landscape and portrait modes, and check that the components are looking the same. Now, an extension to this question is actually that if you're doing the development, okay, and we're doing it screen size wise, the handing over of the graphics from the UI team to the development team, during this process, a lot of things go haywire. So there's one method which is helpful there is using the HTML CSS model, wherein give the whole UI in the form, give all the UI specifications in as in how many pixels you want to leave between two buttons and stuff in the form of an XML which the developer has to port. This involves a little bit of development effort in the background, but it's good because it cuts down on a lot of QA time. Yeah. Any quality related metrics that would be specifically important for mobile applications is no. There are no industry standards as such. What is the best language for developing mobile apps is, well, this totally depends on the app store you're targeting. If you want to do OV, if you want to develop apps for OV, you need to have a Symbian C++ background. If you're doing it for Android or a BlackBerry app store, you need Java. So this totally depends on what is the app store you're targeting. Surendra says automation available for mobile UI testing. Yes, it is available. The automation tool I told you about, it's there in my presentation. It is it allows for UI testing as well. Explain of Pankaj asked, do you recommend testing on device before shipping, or emulator testing is good enough? What ratio you follow at Spice Labs? We do not follow any fixed ratio. Mostly wherever we do not have the device, our first preference is always to check on the device, because there are certain features like in-app, for example, which you won't be able to do effectively on emulator, BBM or in-app. You won't be able to effectively test it on an emulator. Or let's say you're doing something around NFC, you won't be able to do it on an emulator. So in such cases, testing on device becomes important. But if you have the device available with you, it's always recommended to do the testing on the device and then ship it. Okay, Swati has a interesting question. Given that apps have their own approval cycles, people tend to keep some server-side development for that period. Do you think it's advisable, as it's not much of an agile mode of development, which means there's too much of hopping from testing to dev to testing? This is totally agreed. Here, mostly what is advisable to do in such a situation is to have your server-side development going on in parallel. See, when you are doing whenever you're planning out your activities, you know the server infrastructure that you require at the backend. So mostly it's best to keep your server-side development independent of the release cycles, so that there is no dependency. And because you know what is the infrastructure you're going to require, so it's always advisable to have it ready in advance. And of course, if you have small things coming up in the end which requires server-side integration offhand, all of a sudden it comes up, then yes, it has to, there is a hopping from testing to dev to testing, and that is where you need to know where you need to draw the line. We have a now Teja asks, we have a company from market like Device Anywhere for automation testing. How best they're useful for testing when we are at a starting phase? It totally depends on the type of apps you're doing, for one, and secondly, I believe when you're saying that we're at a starting phase, you mean that it's more of a smaller setup. So automation testing, as long as they're not eating up too much of your resources and your time in the setup process, it's good if you're able to fit it into your schedule. But what we have found generally is that the whole automation testing process takes up a lot of time to set up. So, and we are generally scrunched for time, so we don't have the kind of time to give it to automation testing. So we personally follow a manual testing model. Automation testing, we just keep it, or rather that too is, I would rather say it's just a semi-automated testing, is we do it only for the server side components that we have. What are the trade-offs one generally faces while choosing between native and cross-platform app development? Native app development, one thing is harder to test. You will, the kind of infrastructure that you need to test native applications is going to be tough because it's going to be device wise. So that's generally one of the major contention points. I guess. Okay, I guess we'll be, now we'll just log off. If there are any more questions, you can always keep them pouring in. My email ID is arunima.shekhar@spicelabs.in. And I hope you guys found this presentation and the QA session useful. Hoping to hear from you again. Thank you. Thank you, Bharat.
Thanks, Ms. Arunima, for your session on project management and quality assurance for mobile apps. It was indeed an enlightening session. I would also like to thank our participants for their support in making this webinar a huge success. Well, the recording of this webinar will be made available on techgeek.com by tomorrow, and we'll keep you posted about the next set of webinars which will be happening in November. Right. Thank you.